Author and social media expert Dave Evans joins the Plutopia podcast this time as we discuss misinformation and fact-checking. Dave leads the technical innovation firm Digital Voodoo. His social media fact-checking program, Does It Square, uses AI to spot misinformation online.
One of the more interesting facts about misinformation is that it's generally about half true. In developing Does It Square, one of the first scales that I implemented was, how true, how false is this? And what I found was everything was basically 50%, right? Because really good information starts with some kind of fact that everyone agrees this is a fact. But then it extends that in a way that either the data or the methodology doesn't support. It makes some kind of unfounded claim. It makes no references to anything that supports those extensions or those interpretations or anything like that. So you're left with this thing that says, okay, this underlying fact is true, and here's the interpretation of it. Wow, I guess that's, true. Well, not really.
Welcome, everybody, to the Plutopia News Network podcast. Wait a minute, I said welcome everybody. Does that assume everybody is here? Everybody's here who should be here anyway. I am John Lepkowski, and I am joined by my co-hosts, Scoop Sweeney and Wendy Grossman, and by our guest, Dave Evans. And I'm really happy to see Dave. Dave and I have known each other for a long time.
Long time.
He was an early social media expert focusing on social media marketing. He wrote a couple of books about that: Social Media Marketing, An Hour a Day, and Social Customer Experience, Engage and Retain Customers Through Social Media. And we did a little bit of social media work together. Dave leads the technical innovation firm Digital Voodoo. Is that still based in Austin, or did it go with you to Florida?
That's actually still based in Texas. Still based in Austin.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah, since
And
1994.
his latest project is an AI-driven social media fact-checking platform, which was created to address misinformation online, sort of a personal way to check things out. And it's called Does It Square? And why did you do that, Dave? What led you to develop such a platform?
There were really a couple of things. One was what I saw as a way to start bridging gaps between people. If we could sort of have a neutral, here's some basis, here's some factual underpinning, here's some, whatever for a conversation. People taking any point of view could sort of rally around or look at that and consider that. What I've found is, if you kind of subtract the extremists, right? You can define that however you want. In most conversations, people have a point of view. And there's actually a lot of shared common area in the conversation, but very often the points of view can sort of overshadow that. So if we can get people to kind of agree on, okay, here's some underlying, I don't want to call them truths because it sounds kind of judgmental, but it's like, call them truths. Some underlying truths in the conversation, or some facts or some constraints, or, whatever. If we can sort of agree on those things, then we could actually listen to each other and understand why the different points of view, right? People have points of view for whatever reason, experiences they've had, the way they've grown up, work that they've done, whatever. And they're generally valid points of view. They may not be my point of view or your point of view, but they're someone's point of view. And so it's important that we learn to listen to each other and understand, given this kind of common set of here's how this thing works, or, whatever's governing this thing, whatever. Here's each of our points of view. Let's have that conversation, right? As a way to do something about the vision. And then
somewhere in there, there's facts too.
there's
aside from anybody's point of view, there's also some things are just factual, right?
Exactly. And even that, and I hope to get into that today a little bit, even that has become a little bit problematic with the sort of dismissal of expertise, the dismissal of facts. It seems like one of the common arguments is, well, yeah, if you believe that, but and there are some things that are fairly factual or rooted in facts, or certainly rooted in historical precedent, or here's the dates that certain things happened, or whatever. I mean, there is some underlying truth to most things. And then within that, we need to respect and understand individuals have their point of view, and why do they have this point of view? So I kind of came at it from that approach. The other thing that really drove this was when I look at services like Snopes or BBC Verify or New York Times, and some of their fact checking, PolitiFact, et cetera. All of these are laudable services. However, that may not be the thing that I need to fact check, right? And when I'm going through and looking at friends' posts on Facebook, or I see something on X or whatever, I want to fact check that thing, right? And the number of things that people say and the number of things that are posted far outstrips the capability for a handful of services to say, okay, yeah, just go look up that fact, and or look up that statement. Here's some evaluation of that, or something like that. So I wanted something that people could use, install in their web browser, or just a really simple, copy paste, one click, and here's some information about this that you can either inject back, post back into that stream. If there's a conversation going on Facebook, you can take parts of that analysis that John, that you were just showing, and put that back into the conversation, and sort of divert away from this side, this side, this. Okay, here's this sort of set of, do we agree on this, right? If there's certain things that we can't agree on, water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? If we can't agree on that, there's not a lot of point in having the rest of the conversation. But if we can agree on that, then we can start to understand, okay, why does this happen? What does this mean? What's the significance of it? Et cetera. Right. And so it's really about that combination of some kind of a tool that anyone can use to fact check anything quickly in the moment, and then this ability to sort of establish what are the central truths in this. And in the moment, that sort of spontaneous idea, that one struck me as really important, because when I look at not the causes of misinformation, that's a different thing that we can get into, but the spread of misinformation, right, very often is driven by something that is deliberately constructed to evoke an emotive response, an emotional response. And I see something and I'm like, yeah, I agree with that, and I click share. As soon as I've done that, I've hit the amplifier on this. What I wanted was something that it's like, hey, let me just check this thing, because if that's true, I want to share this. And again, I realize I'm sort of straying into judgmental language here, but it's like, if that's correct, if the underlying things really support what this is saying, I want to share that. But if it doesn't, then I'm doing myself and everyone else a disservice by sharing this. I need to just like kind of take a breath. Let's see what this is, and then decide to share it. If we can just inject that pause in the stream, that also seems to go a long way in starting to do something about the spread of misinformation. We can talk about the motives of misinformation, which is separate, but the spread of misinformation certainly seem to impact that.
Can you say a little bit about how you've seen social media evolve or change over the years? Because you've been there since they started calling it social media, and I have too.
Yeah,
And I think it's useful to kind of look at that history because it's changed a lot, right?
it has. In my first book, I opened up with a statement from Sir Tim Berners-Lee. And it was from his 1995 MIT commencement address. And it basically, I'll paraphrase a little bit. It's a relatively lengthy statement, but I'll paraphrase a little bit. And what it said was the internet should be a place where, discussion is welcome, where we can see, understand, evaluate, and through discussion, leave things better for the next generation, right? Or for the next user, the next person to come along and, sort of interact with whatever it is that we left behind. And that strikes me now as this like sort of incredibly aspirational goal and an incredibly naive understanding about, and this is my understanding that I'm talking about, right? My understanding of what other interests might do with something like the internet and the web and social media. And in fact, we've seen that come to play. I mean, I think one of the things that really underpins a lot of this, and one of the biggest changes in social media, although when you step back and look at it, you can sort of understand it completely, because you can go down one of two paths with the development and the spread of social media. It is highly controlled, subject to moderation, and so on, as older networks were. Right. Remember when Facebook first started, if you didn't have an edu domain, you weren't part of it. And then it was opened up and expanded and expanded, and it became
And
sort of
actually,
like the place. Wendy, go ahead.
If you didn't go to Harvard, you were out of it when it first started.
Initially, that's right. That's right. And then it was Ivy League, and then it was edu, and yeah, exactly. And so as that opened up, then the question becomes, okay, who pays for this? Is it $10 a month? Or is it free, right? Or X dollars a month, or is it free? And the model was, let's just make it free to use. John, you probably recall the first, what was it, Zima? And what was the other? There were two ads that were run on the first web page. Zima was one of them. With the beginnings of the ad-driven business model, and now like just the absolute proliferation of the ad-driven business model, it is absolutely in the network's interest to amplify engaging content. And one of the sort of human realities is we respond. I wrote about this as well in the first book on social media. As a species, we definitely pay attention to negative, anger, danger, those kinds of things. If you look at, there was an MIT Media Lab study done that showed that negative, anger, et cetera, those kinds of messages and misinformation constructed that way in general spreads about 6 times faster than truthful information, which is almost always, kind of boring, kind of like, okay.
I think that's got to be an underestimate.
It certainly seems like that. And in the study, this was a 2018, if I recall correctly, it was about a 2018 study. So it may well be by now.
It
But
seems to me,
go ahead,
you're up against a couple of things. I mean, one is that there are quite a few disinformation campaigns that take advantage of the various conditions that you're talking about.
Yep.
And so, one friend of mine did a study. She was sent a message on Tumblr that she had personally reposted some message that was written by a Russian bot. And when she looked at it closely, it very much played on a division that existed in the community she was part of. And, she would have posted again because she agreed with it. But it was also, its payload was that it was very divisive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we evolved, as I'd said in the book, we evolved to prioritize the tiger behind the tree over the oranges in the tree. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it, right?
We wouldn't have been able to eat the oranges if we'd
exactly. We wouldn't have gotten that far. That's right. And so, it's sort of human nature to cue into this. Facebook's own research has shown this. The introduction of the anger emoji, right, is all about this, right? And so when we look at why things get amplified, all of this kind of stuff and the evolution of social media to kind of capitalize on this to drive revenue to the network owners, right? That is their business model. Their business model is ad driven. We know that anger drives engagement, obviously among other things, but since we're talking about this, anger absolutely drives engagement, and this is good for their business. They have taken, some steps to try to curtail this, but when, again, you get into it's an issue for a whole different podcast on what the motives really are or what the controls really are, how effective they are to do something about hate speech, about scams, about, et cetera, right? There's all kinds of information available on that. But, kind of getting back to where we were, uh, when I think about the role of anger, of strong, of negative emotion, of, hey, hit that share button. These are the things that have really taken over in social media. The other thing, as a mechanism, as an engagement or subscription mechanism, the other thing that really came out, I think really comes out strongly in social media, is unlike traditional media. I mean, remember when we were all young, right? This is way back. Wednesday nights at 7:30, I Dream of Jeannie. And that was, and you had two other channels, and those were your choices, right? That's what you could listen to. And there was news, at 6 or 6:30 before that, maybe starting at 5, whatever. Those were your choices. Now, each of us can construct completely our own media streams. What we listen to, what we watch, movies that we watch, Spotify, all of our, we can curate everything, which is really great. I mean, if you like a certain kind of music, why not build a channel around that and listen to it? Occasionally it's probably good to branch out and listen to something that you might not normally listen to. But that's, again, that's a matter for a different show. Um, but when I think about the construction of our own media streams and this sort of ad-driven model that very much understands by looking at other sites that I've visited, things that I've posted, people that I've friended, what they liked, the network starts to serve what I like and what I believe, right? Or what I've shown basis or an interest in. That starts to breed this, not necessarily division, but it breeds, the echo chambers, the thought bubbles, whatever you want to call it, the filter bubbles, whatever you want to call them.
But I
And
think
so,
there's also an issue, though, of users don't look for certain kinds of things. Like my friend has a really conservative neighbor in Pennsylvania, and I was visiting him at Christmas, and he was complaining about Wikipedia and Wikipedia being biased. And somewhere toward the end of the conversation, he said, they really ought to have some way that you can go back and see old versions of pages. And I said, well, they do. It's called the talk page. It's
they
linked at the
do,
top.
yeah.
And every single page has one. You can go and review all of the history. It's a really good example of how knowledge is curated, and it's really an important learning tool. It had never occurred to him to look for it. He probably didn't even think of having one until that
Yeah.
moment. But it's just kind of, you're up against an enormous amount of apathy where people are frustrated. I think people are frustrated when they can't believe what they see, but they don't want to put a lot of work into what is, after all, entertainment.
That's such a great point. On a couple of things. First off, very often the tools are there. People don't realize that they're there. Second, it's entertainment. It's not information, right? You can find the information, but the channel is coming at you from pretty much an entertainment perspective, which, as long as you view it that way, it's like nothing wrong with entertainment, right? And then the third thing that you mentioned was doing the work. It is work to do some of this, and it does challenge you. And one of the points that I make when I'm talking with people about this is it's so important to read, to consume, so to speak, but to read points of view that as an individual, I or you or whatever may not agree with. one, to recognize that these points of view are there, to look for why do they feel this way, or what underlies this? Is this just outright, wacky thinking, or is this just something that I've never thought of it this way? And now that I'm thinking of it this way, I can see why they, prefer that point of view. And I can also sort of turn around and look at my point of view from a distance and kind of judge it and measure it against that and say, does mine really hold as much water as I like to think it does? Because it may not, right? And so this, reading and consuming diverse information sources, it's all there, but you do have to do some work and look for it. The topic of media literacy and teaching media literacy, or having access to tools that help us explore and learn for ourselves what media literacy is about.
Well, talking about media literacy, back in the 1970s, I was a editor at a radio news service in San Francisco, and we had to go out and get information from all sorts of sources. And in those days, it was you kind of had to have some sort of trust in the source, because there was not any instant way, unless you had a big budget, to send people out to find out if they were lying or not.
Yeah.
So I would cover a lot of politicians and political rallies and things, and you kind of had to know the issues to be able to decide if this person is lying or if it's a truth. So we've come a long way. But in the recent election, the Project 2025 was pointed out as being a source of misinformation, but in hindsight, it was actually a source of their roadmap for where we're kind of at now.
Very much, very much. I mean, it existed, it laid out the plan, and, off we go. It wasn't misinformation at all. Now, some of what it's based in, some of how it was presented, one of the I think more interesting facts about misinformation is that, and I've got some examples of it if you want to look at those. One of the more interesting facts about misinformation is that it's generally about half true. In developing Does It Square, one of the first scales that I implemented was, how true, how false is this? And what I found was everything was basically 50%, right? Because really good information starts with some kind of fact that everyone agrees this is a fact, but then it extends that in a way that either the data or the methodology doesn't support. It makes some kind of unfounded claim. It makes no references to anything that supports those extensions or those interpretations or anything like that. So you're left with this thing that says, okay, this underlying fact is true, and here's the interpretation of it. Wow, I mean, I guess that's, true. Well,
Yeah.
not really, right?
But we have a real good example of a problem that's plaguing us really right now, and that is that this woman, Renee Good, was shot
Yeah.
by an ICE officer a couple of days ago. And there's video of the shooting, and there's multiple videos of the shooting, and they've played endlessly on social media and on television, and people are seeing entirely different things in the video. You know, either they're saying that she was trying to run the guy who shot her down, or that she absolutely wasn't trying to run him down. And, when I look at it, I think she absolutely wasn't trying to run him down. But I'm reading these people who are completely convinced. And what's happened is that perception has been politicized.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is, again, one of the motivations for, Does It Square, and what I hope is sets of tools like this. When the natural reaction is to decide which team you're on before you decide what you believe, or, what the truth is, it's a really dangerous place, especially in a democracy. You know, in a autocratic society, in a dictatorship, it's pretty easy. You either believe the party line, or sort of look for the exits, one of the two. But in a democracy, it really does depend on us having individual points of view and respecting those things, having some discourse around why we believe certain things, and being able to kind of navigate what's what is the common area here, because that's really the way that we're gonna live. Yeah, it is. It's really, from an academic point of view, it's interesting to see this. From a societal point of view, it's really scary to see this sort of absolute failure currently in our ability to talk to each other. I know that's sort of a gross oversimplification, but it's like I think there are a lot of people that truly cannot talk to each other anymore, which is sad, because I think most people have some kind of a point of view based in some kind of a thing that has happened to them, or experience that they've had, or whatever. And if you take the time to understand that, you still, I still may not agree with them, but I do understand why they feel that way. And then if we can agree on some basic facts, we're actually sort of on our way to, okay, how do we accommodate both points of view in something that we can share and kind of get along.
Well, the problem that is uh, made determining what's real and what's not real has emerged into basically an international problem of Elon Musk creating an AI product that is intended to sexualize normal photographs and turn them into deep fake nudes. And it's become, in Europe, I understand it's gotten a lot of pushback. And how can people know what is real and what is not real when you have things like that? Photoshop used to be sort of able to do that, but now, I mean, the AI stuff is hard to determine.
It's extremely hard to tell apart.
Maybe a little bit precise. We don't have any evidence that Elon Musk ordered this or anything like it. It is an ability that Grok has. We don't actually know anything about how Grok got it.
Yeah, probably learned it.
Well, it's just to go along with that. There was a paper that came out a couple of weeks ago called "Part Fakes" or "Fake Parts." I think "Fake Parts." I think, and the research has discovered that much more challenging than just faking a whole video is faking parts of a real video, so that they're very subtle changes.
Mm-hmm.
And what they predict is that things like you can make very slight alterations to someone's expression while they're speaking, and that can really change the whole emotional impact of the clip.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
And they're talking about that being a lot more dangerous than what we're seeing right now.
Than outright fake. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the guy who invented the shovel probably didn't really envision it being used to bludgeon people to death.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that way with AI.
Do you remember in again, this is going back a ways, in comic books, the X-ray glasses?
Oh yeah.
And it would always show a guy looking at his hand and seeing the bones in his hand, but there was always an attractive woman off in the set, right? And the implication was kind of clear. It was like, wow, if I can see through my hand, what else can I see through, right? And so this is not new stuff, but the way that it's implemented now, and how difficult it is, or basically impossible to really say, is that real or not?
Well, the other thing is it doesn't have to be very good to take in men, apparently, because I remember back in the days of Usenet, Steffi Graf sued Microsoft over a still image that was supposed to be of her that had put her head onto some other nude body. It wasn't actually her, but she couldn't get it taken down off some site that somehow had something to do with Microsoft.
Yeah.
And I definitely saw in the tennis news group people saying, "Oh, Steffi Graf has posed nude." She never posed nude. She was not at all like that, but whatever like that means. But and I think I saw the image and it looked really fake. But
Right.
apparently these
Right.
guys really wanted to believe it was nude Steffi Graf, so they
Oh, yeah,
did.
oh yeah, 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 yeah. The bar to trickery is actually pretty low. Um,
You
and
know, this kind of raises another question about your tool. I mean, your tool uses an AI to help determine whether something's factual or not. And you and I ran into this the other day, the question about the tool, whether the AI is accurate and how hard it is to I mean, there's a lot that's happening in AI. People think of it as, well, it's really just predicts what word should follow the last word or something like that. Well, it's a lot more than that. And how difficult has it been for you to incorporate an AI that you feel confident about in making these assessments?
that is absolutely a challenge. And so and let me go into just a little bit of detail on this because it's relevant to the question that you're asking. And the situation that you were describing, and one of the things that I noticed was depending on the tool that I used, if I used one of the, sort of free entry level tools, it tended to get things wrong. Like, you know, I had posted a thing about one of the NASA probes and a discovery that it made in 2025. And the response back was, this is clearly fake because 2025 is in the future. And I was like, no, actually, this happened last month in 2025. And one of the things that you realize is that depending on the tool that you're using, very current events can be problematic because there isn't enough learning around that event. Things that happened 10 years ago, they generally get right. Right. So first off, there's a difference in the models. And then the second thing is just in terms of some of the accuracy. And I think, John, that was the issue with what we were looking at, right? We were talking about Rob Reiner and the response back from that model as I'm evaluating these different models. The response back from that model was, no, in fact, Rob Reiner is alive and living and doing well. And it's like, no, actually, that's not true, right? And so you do have to do this. And one of the things that I've had to pay attention to, and you sort of run tests on what are the things that we basically know are true. Is this getting that right? And the other big piece of it is, what are the sources for this, right? If you can go to the source, very often you can sort of look at the conclusion that some kind of a service is a research service is making, and you can read for yourself, is that actually what this is saying or not, right? For example, in preparation for this podcast, one of the things that I looked at was the role that bots play in amplifying misinformation. And they absolutely play a role in this, right? One of the areas that they play a role in is just by the sheer amount of content that they can generate. They can overwhelm most users. If you see fact, 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 fact enough times, you'll just conclude that it's true, even though they were all false, right? Whereas if you see a fact and you can sort of digest it and challenge it and find, okay, this is not exactly a fact, right? Then you have some chance of getting it right. So they do that. But the MIT Media Lab, in the results, and this is one of the sources that were in that conclusion, actually said exactly the opposite. It said, while bots do play a role in amplifying content, it's on the volume side. But what really plays the driving role in amplifying misinformation is that immediate share, right? The share button, the way that it works, and the way the network sort of zones in on what are you liking and amplifying and so on. We're going to serve you more of that, right? And then the spread that you have, when you have a 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 friends or something on a network, when you hit share, that is an amplification capability that we simply did not have 20 years ago. I say 20 years ago, it's probably
So
40 now, but it's,
what if there were a law
yeah.
that said that social media had to require you to come back and confirm before you were allowed to share anything? You could hit the share button, but you'd have to come back after 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever time limit you want and confirm it before it would actually go out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting sort of path to go down. Your earlier comment about Wikipedia, in maybe an odd kind of way, that's how Wikipedia works, right? One of the criticisms of Wikipedia that I get all the time is, yeah, anybody can post whatever they want. You can't trust it because you can just change the article and whatnot. Yeah, and about 4 seconds later, it will be reverted to its original or
Yeah,
its corrected version, right?
you tell them if they want to test this in action, tell them to set up a page for something. It's
Exactly.
really hard now to get a
Right.
new page.
Yeah, so this notion of you can say and do whatever you want, but then it's subject to this verification, right? That actually happens in places like Wikipedia. That's exactly how it really works. Uh, to bring that to social media and to things, for conversations that we're having at parties and things like that. I think you start to get into a little bit of overreach, like what does it really mean to say that I'm not free to say whatever I want, that it has to get verified before it's made permanent? What does that
Uh,
really mean? As
Wait,
opposed to I can
well, the
say
idea was
whatever I
that
want.
the idea was that they would have to verify it themselves. It's not that they have to verify it; they just have to be made to. I remember reading an etiquette book when I was a child
Mhm.
that said if you're ever really angry and you write a letter, don't send it for 3 days, right? Because
Yeah.
that'll give you time to think and cool off, and then read the letter and think, yeah, that's kind of mean. Well, exactly the same principle,
Yeah,
right?
Google's goggles feature was a great one. If I come home at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm drunk and I fire off some email and I have goggles enabled, it's not going out until the next day. And I can sort of go
Actually,
look and say, I really want to send that.
one of the online systems I was on is called Kix. It's a London-based conferencing system.
Mhm.
It predates the internet. It was founded in like 1986 or something. And at one, you could write macros for it. And somebody wrote a macro that would go around and show you all the messages you wrote last night. And delete them if you wanted to. And I did not,
Exactly.
because I don't drink, it didn't occur to me for years that actually what that was about was people waking up in the morning and realizing what they'd written about.
Oh, what did I say? What did I do? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I do think that there's maybe more agreement with the notion that says you can say and do whatever you want, but you are responsible for the consequences, right? And
You
from
own
the
your own
network's
words.
perspective, if you're posting, for example, let's just take a sort of non-controversial example, not completely non-controversial, but hate speech, right? Physically violent speech, whatever, outright scams. The networks do have a duty to take that stuff down. And in fact, to a certain extent, they do. Although, again, which is probably a subject for a different podcast, um, there is actually quite a bit of money made on fake information, scams, this kind of content before it's taken down, right?
Something like 10% of Facebook's revenues.
That was I think it was
It was their own
20.
internal memo. Yeah.
Yeah, 2019 or something along in there, 20 or 2024, and they did a study and estimated that about 10% of their revenues, $15 billion, whatever it um, was attributed to that. And so there's actually quite an incentive, when you think about how our markets work and things like that. There's quite a bit of incentive to leave that content in place, right? There's also, I think, if you look at it from a societal perspective, there are strong indicators or strong rationale for removing that kind of content, for exactly that. Um, but one of the things that I find interesting is the degree to which most people will accept misinformation if it intuitively if it is intuitively agreeable. Um, One of my recent fact checks, and it's a super non-controversial example. And it was something that I literally overheard at a party, fact checked it, and got the details. And the claim made was that the way that a bee flies breaks the laws of physics. And I heard this, and as a physicist, I was kind of like, okay, first off, bees can fly, right? We know that. That's a fact. Second, if the flight of a bee broke the laws of physics, instead of trying to understand what's going on in the center of a black hole, I'd be taking pictures of bees, because if I can show something that is breaking the laws of physics, I'm on my way to a Nobel Prize. And what am I doing in the center of some black hole when I could just be in my garden photographing bees, right? So this is sort of immediately suspect. And like good misinformation, this actually has its roots in a real event. It was an entomologist and an engineer. They were in a bar. That should be a clue, right? They were in a bar, and they were talking about the flight of insects and the flight of bees in particular. And they worked out, doing all of the correct calculations, they worked out that a bee, in fact, should not be able to fly. Aerodynamically, it cannot fly. And that was in the 20s or 30s, somewhere along there. And that begot this whole myth of, the way that a bee flies breaks the laws of physics, right? And it's been persistent since then. The problem with it was they made a couple of key assumptions that turned out to be wrong, right? First off, they believed that a bee's wings were fixed like airplanes' wings were at the time. And they believed that they flapped up and down like a bird does, because that was the best understanding of how things fly at the time. Turns out that neither one of those is true for a bee, right? A bee's wings work in an entirely different mechanism. And once that was understood, which came about in the 90s, something like that, once that was understood, no, bees fly perfectly well, and physics can explain the whole thing. Bernoulli's principle explains the whole thing. So you see things like that. And I heard this at this party, and sort of right around the table, everybody's like, yeah, I agree with that. And the claim was, because it breaks the laws of physics, obviously there's something else going on here. There's some other force or power or whatever at work here. And everybody kind of like head nodded, and yeah, I agree with that. I believe that. I think that's really interesting. The sort of first reaction, I think, should have been, wait a second. If it truly breaks the laws of physics, there's probably something to look at here before we go too much further with this. But, our, again, human nature and groupthink and things like that, we want to be agreeable. We hear something, it is intuitively logical, it breaks the laws of physics. Well, I don't really know what the laws of physics are. So I guess if they get broken, they get broken. It's, I don't know if they're absolute or not. Turns out they're actually pretty absolute. But if they get broken, whatever, and all of a sudden you're in this camp that kind of believes this, the Flat Earth Society and some of the things that are cited as evidence for a flat Earth. When you really kind of dissect them, it's like, no, that's really not evidence for that at all. Now, if somebody wants to believe that, if that's a society that they enjoy the fellowship of it, it's like, have at it, absolutely. We're all different. We all have different motivations. We have different points of view. Great.
Well, one of the enablers of misinformation on social media is also caused by nefarious activities of click farms. And
Yes.
John kind of encountered some of that when he did stats on our listeners. And SAP found that we had an enormous number of listeners from China, which doesn't really, we don't have a Chinese language translation going on here. And I did a little, querying on Chinese click farms, and that's a big business there. I mean, if you want to make money, that's the place to be.
Absolutely. And the role of misinformation in driving revenue from disingenuous sources is absolutely huge. One of the other recent one of my recent fact checks was as a cancer survivor, right? It's what sort of caught my attention, and the claim was, does anyone else find it odd that $200 billion is spent every year on cancer research, and yet there's a 75% increase in cancer deaths? You know, this whole who's really getting rich off this whole cancer research thing? And you sort of read that and it's kind of like, okay, I want to click in and look at that. But as soon as you look at it, if you just take that exact statement as it was made on X and you put that into the X search bar, you'll find pages and pages and pages, all different profiles, all verified profiles, or a large number of verified profiles, all posting exactly the same thing at basically the same time. Right? I mean, this is the work of bots, and it's all designed to generate views of that profile, which then translates into ad revenue from X. And so this is a huge issue. It turns out that the 200 billion is wrong. The 75% increase is wrong. The whole statement is wrong, right? The entire statement is wrong. But there it is. Another one of the really great ones, taking this sort of another step. When you look at some of the more nefarious purposes of misinformation, I mean, clearly outright revenue generation is one of them, but driving a point of view, and in particular, driving divisive and hate speech is another one. One of the ones that I cited, and I'll give the statement first, and then I want to make an important disclaimer about the statement because this really gets to what happens with misinformation. The statement was, and this was prior to Mayor Mamdani's swearing in. Mamdani expected to require all students to learn Arabic numerals. And Wendy, I see you laugh. You're laughing already, right? I mean, so there's the
Well, I
statement.
hope they learn Arabic numerals.
Exactly. So, number one, the statement was made, and I have to assume that this was a satirical post, right? Because we've been using Arabic numerals for about 2,000 years, the Hindu Arabic number set, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. That's it, right? But what they're playing on is, here's this Muslim mayor, Arabic, making this statement. And what was really interesting about it was, if you look through the comments, there were a couple of, every 10th comment or so, somebody's like, clearly this is a satirical post. We've been using this, and so on. The majority of the comments were just the most invective, hate speech,
This is how
all
they
these
get.
kinds of things
But
of,
this is how a lot of stuff is gotten away with. Trump can go around telling people that London is a no-go area, Birmingham is a no-go area for police, or London is Muslim, or whatever he wants, because the vast majority of the people who vote for him have never been to these places and are never going to these places.
there's a reality of, sort of like the self-experience. What have I experienced? What have I seen? What do I believe? What has happened to me? And this is why I think it's so important to understand some of those points of view, or the people who have those points of view, right? I mean, people generally have a point of view, regardless of what the point of view is. They have that point of view for a reason. And it may have been something that happened to them. It may have happened to a friend. It may be some experience. It may be some frustration with something. It's like, whatever it is, they have this point of view. But then to see the comments that followed that post, it was just like, to just immediately devolve into hate over this was like, wait a second, like 2 seconds of checking will tell you, yeah, the Arabic numerals are what we all use. Right. This is a nothing post, but it's designed. And again, if you then went through X, you saw thousands of the same post made over and over again by verified accounts, all for revenue generation. And you saw the same streams of hate-filled comments. And it's just this really sort of telling factor about how important it is that we kind of come to grips with what is misinformation, what are we doing about it, what's our responsibility, is the answer to this really upping media literacy and things like that? Do we require, do we have this, we don't teach civics in class anymore, right? We've gotten to where we teach, again, I know it's a simplification, but we teach sort of to standardized tests and things like that, and civics is generally not part of it. Some of the things that we used to do, shop and whatnot, they're not necessarily part of this anymore. Is media literacy important enough in a society like ours that this becomes some kind of a required class? If we sort of dangerously stray into things like sex education and all of the polarization and strong feelings that occur with that, this should be taught in the home, or this should be taught, or whatever. Imagine teaching media literacy. Who would decide what are the correct facts, or what are the correct facts or not?
But isn't that the problem of designing the same problem? Don't you have the same problem in trying to design something that enables fact checking? Because somebody has to decide for that service what the facts are.
You do. And so one of the pivots that I made in Does It Swear was moving away from, is this thing true, false? Where does this fall on the factometer? And instead looking at, and what I wrote the patent around for was linguistic analysis, using linguistic analysis to detect misinformation. So what the scales in Does It Square really talk about, and what the analyses really talk about, is how charged is this language? Is this libertarian or authoritarian speech? Is this evidence-based, or is this appealing to your intuition?
Yeah, intuition based. I got a lot of responses like that from Does It Square.
Yeah. If is the language sort of neutral? Is it just calmly stated, as it might be false, but it's just calmly stated? Or is it really sort of charged up and you need to do something about this? And is it like that? Those are some of the indicators of misinformation. So rather than trying to judge something true or false, what I then sort of evolved to in this model was, wait, maybe if I can point out instead, hey, this is highly charged language, there's some extremist content in here, and there aren't a whole lot of references to anything, maybe you should look at this.
I wonder if you could
Rather than
create
saying this is true or false, therefore do or don't.
could you create a linguistic analysis for emotional intelligence?
Probably.
That might be one thing to look at. I mean, this struck me just a few minutes ago as we were talking about this, that one of the things lacking is a kind of emotional intelligence, that people are feeling so much anger and
Yeah.
they don't even understand their own anger, right?
Mm-hmm. They don't. It's like, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone. I go into a conversation with the assumption that I'm right. Here's what I believe, and I can point to the facts about this, and these are based in logic. And if you don't agree with this, it's because you either don't understand the facts or you don't understand logic. One of the two, right? That's a real disservice to the conversation, right? What I should be going into the conversation with is, here's what I believe, and here's why I believe it, but what does the other person believe, and why do they believe? And, going back to my earlier thing, if we can't agree that water freezes at 32, it's probably not a good conversation, right? But if we can agree that water freezes at 32 and they see the rest of the events one way and I see them a different way, well, we have two different points of view and we could probably both learn from each other, right?
One of the things I really like about this gig of doing the podcast is the nature of it is that I have to ask questions. I don't have to make statements. I don't have to assert myself at all. I have to ask questions. And one of the things I've found it hard to do in my day to day is to remember to ask questions instead of trying to make assertions, you know, because
Yeah.
there's a lot I don't know. And actually, you gain more from a conversation if you're asking questions, I
Ab-
believe.
Absolutely. One of the truisms about discourse is there should be a learning. I mean, there should be a learning on both sides. If you go to a lecture, one group is primarily listening, one group or one individual is primarily talking. Right? That's the nature of a lecture. But if it's a conversation, there is absolutely a back and forth, and the conversation may move over time, right? Over a few minutes or over an hour or however long the conversation lasts over years. But that's the nature of a conversation. And in general, if we're not asking questions, and even more importantly, if we're not listening to the answers, the answers given by whoever was asked, we're really not participating in the conversation. We're there to make our point. One of the things that you learn as a communicator is to spot when it's happening and to make sure that you as an individual are doing it when you're listening to someone's answer. But what you're really listening for is the pause so that you can inject the answer that you actually had 4 minutes ago. You're really not listening to the conversation, right?
People wait for pauses.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's that whole other problem. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, listening and sort of understanding. And again, this gets to the central role of, however the service or a tool or whatever works. If we can sort of lay out, here's a basic set of principles that governs this thing that we're talking about. Now let's talk about our points of view on what those mean and how those manifest. That's an entirely different thing than side A, side B, side A, side B, side A, side B, right? With no motion toward the center. And I was very much after the former, not because I see that we have a whole lot of the latter.
I was watching a clip of a comedian that somebody sent me this morning, and his his the thing he was talking about was how he really wishes he was dumb because dumb people have such complete confidence in their beliefs. So I would just be
The
so confident if only I was dumb.
What is that? That's the
Which comedian was that?
Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
so.
Who was the comedian?
Oh, I'll have to look, but I think I can find it. Give me a
Yeah. No, and I mean, I have absolutely done stuff like that where I've almost injured myself. Um, I was so convinced that, without even thinking, that I'm right about something, and here's how this works, and I'm about to do something. And I remember one time I was in South Texas when I worked for in oil field, and it was the first tornado that I've ever seen. So I'm standing in this field, and if you know anything about South Texas, it's flat, right? There's huge fields, and it's all caliche, these dirt clods. And here comes this tornado. It's a little one, but it's kind of moving toward us. And I notice that everybody is kind of on the ground. They're kind of scraping stuff away, like trying to find or make some kind of shelter. And I'm standing there and I'm looking at this thing and I'm just fascinated by it. I'm like, this is amazing. I've never seen one of these things before. And I said, out loud, I said, this is so cool. Like, look at that. And just about the time that I said that, this guy puts his hand on my shoulder and grabs me and he just says, son, obviously you are not from around here. Start digging.
I was going to say, you didn't see The Wizard of Oz as a child?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I learned the first time I was in Missouri and there was a tornado watch. I was far more freaked out than anybody who lived there. They were all sort of, oh yeah, we get these all the time. You just watch the,
Yeah, if it comes toward you, you might want to do something, but as long as it's over there, it's like, yeah.
I
Um,
found the comedian's name. It was Trey Crowder. T-R-A-E, Trey Crowder.
Trey Crowder. Yeah.
And we have reached the end of the hour.
What
Can you believe it?
What a great conversation.
It has been a great conversation. I hope you'll come back sometime. We'll talk some more.
I would be happy to.
You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.